we started seeing a level of rise of white nationalism. People became emboldened because they saw what had happened. And this has been years in the making about a lot of our work around platform accountability on Facebook and Twitter and other places. But they became emboldened in new ways. And we had to hire the security director from Southern Poverty Law Center to come in and consult for us. And, we don't have SPLC's endowment. So it was like a thing where I was just like, how much is it going to cost? And we were looking at it, but I also felt like we couldn't just be passive. My thing with Color of Change is how are we active? And so as we started looking at these organizations, we started seeing you could go on Richard Spencer's site and you could enter your PayPal number and you could donate money. You could go on these white nationalist sites and you could buy paraphernalia. And some of the most disgusting things you'd ever imagine, like gun holsters that had anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish sentiments on it. I mean, things that you would not think, and you could go in and you could put your Amex card in, you could put your American Express card in. I mean, you could, and Discover, Visa. And so we reached out to these companies while we were also trying to build a platform. We built this platform called No Blood Money, but we kind of held it back while we tried to have conversations with payment platform sites. And you know what the sites told us? They were like, this is really bad, but you've got to go to the banks. And then we went to the banks and the bank said, you have to go to the credit card companies. And as we were like sort of building up a campaign, these companies knew. So these companies started seeding stories with journalists that we like didn't know what we were doing. And journalists would start calling me and saying, this is not really something the credit card companies could do. And you're going to call out the credit card companies. We're wondering, like if you guys really know what you're doing. And so we're still building the site because what we know at Color of Change, so all of this is about power. Right? This is all about context and power, but we didn't know how we were going to move. And then Charlottesville happens. And I remember being with my family out on Long Island. It was the summer when Charlottesville happened. I was working some, spending some time. It was around the time of our family reunion. So I tried to pop in for a little while, say hi, but get out before there's like too many questions from family members I haven't seen in a long time. And Charlottesville starts happening. And my staff goes into overdrive. Folks go into the office. We work to launch the site and launch everything. As we're launching the site and as we're going live, the credit card companies no longer tell us to go to the banks. They start sending us lists of white nationalist groups that they're going to cut off a funding. Mm-hmm. PayPal, they all start sending us these lists that no law has changed. Remember, nobody had to go and pass anything in Congress like journalists were telling me. All of a sudden, they could start cutting off the fees because they recognized that these groups that were marching actually got their money by raising it online. People were literally putting in PayPal numbers to fund buses of people to go. And they cut it off. And that combined with our efforts to get Bill O'Reilly fired from Fox, and then Bill O'Reilly went out in the world and blamed Color of Change for it because we were responsible. We ran geo-targeted ads to the corporations that were sponsoring the O'Reilly, targeting Black folks and women and telling them to speak out and ask why their corporation was sponsoring the O'Reilly factor. We ran geo-targeted ads over Visa and MasterCard, asking why those companies were allowing. And so staff that would go in, Black staff, Jewish staff, women's staff would go in and ask, and we would say, please contact your boss. And that got us in some heat. But over 150 companies over 150 white nationalist groups have been cut off from funding on these sites. Most recently, we got Google and Google Cloud to cut the Proud Boys off from being able to use their hosted sites. And this is part of how we actually ensure that corporations that say Black Lives Matter, that say they stand up for justice, are not enabling these things. But it does put us in harm's way. It does mean that those institutions, those groups are then targeting us in new ways. But I wouldn't change any of it. Like it's different to say how horrible these groups are, and then for them to continue to be able to grow. It's another thing where they end up not actually being able to do their work. The one quick funny story is that one of the white nationalist groups, white supremacist groups, reached out to have a conversation. And so I didn't know what to do, but of course I was like, this is gonna be good. So they wanted to convince us that they weren't white nationalist groups, that they shouldn't be cut off, that they were the other side of BLM. one told me how powerful our campaign was, because if we weren't actually doing something powerful, they wouldn't have cared what we were doing. But the guy from the group got on the phone to explain to me how he wasn't going to be able to pay his staff, how people were going to lose their jobs. And I was like, I think you're writing my next fundraising appeal. I think, like, I was like sitting, I was like, you're not going to be able to pay your staff. You're like, you might have to close your doors. Like this, I was like, is this for real? Is this, but yeah, but that story was definitely, it was surreal, because you're sitting down, you're like wondering, like, what arguments are they going to bring? But basically,
we're not going to be able to buy those hoods. We can't buy hoods.
He's like, we can't. Yeah, she's like, we're just expressing our First Amendment right. This is dangerous what you're doing. And I was like, he's like, by labeling us as, like, as white nationalists, you're putting us in danger. And I was like, I don't know what to tell you. But I really don't know what to tell you, but I want to tell you that you're only writing the next email. You're only going to help me, like, ensure that I can maybe fund more staff to do this work.
So how do you keep that young face, that youthful smile when you are under this kind of constant threat and danger?
So, part of why I do this work is so that we are unignorable, right? When I think about what does it mean to run an organization that can face down powerful forces and get results, the last thing I want to do is wake up every day and put things out in the world and not have people respond to it, not have people care. And so I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't able to, like, engage in this moment. I might go crazy thinking about it. I also, I grew up doing activism, and I remember back when I was in my early 20s getting to know the late Julian Bond. He would, like, give a lot of young activists advices. And a couple of years later, when I was at GLAAD, I actually helped write the sort of marriage equality speech he would give when he would go around a lot of Black communities, sort of building community between LGBT, and so worked with him, wrote that speech where he would go through Leviticus and ask a set of questions. And he was just great. But I also think, like, I have so much infrastructure and support around me that he just didn't have, that John Lewis didn't have, that Ella Baker didn't have, that Fannie Lou Hamer didn't have. And so I also remind myself of what a different time I am doing this work in, and also have to remind myself that, and I believe we're winning. That's what I will also say. And if there's, like, something that can keep you hopeful and optimistic, is constantly seeing the signs. Color of Change over the summer went from 1.7 million people that had taken action with us in the previous 8 months to 7.2 million that had taken action with us. We went from 150 subscribers on our SMS feed to 6.2 million subscribers on our SMS feed. And we ask people to take action. We're not just asking you to read a book and talk with your friends. We are engaging people and taking action. We also had a whole lot more white people to join us. And we have hired our first director and associate director of ally relationships, because we were doing all these events like Black women's brunches and other things in communities. And we had, like, oh, wow, we have to kind of build some other programs now that are for a different audience that's coming in, so that we can also still have spaces that are, like, Black women focused or Black dad focused or the other focus, but then have events that are also, and now they're all virtual, but except for these events we've been doing in the key states, we've been doing what we're calling Black Joy drive-thrus. And they're drive-in movies. And so we're showing movies that we're calling Black Joy, like movies that are very Black, but not, like, civil rights focused. And so we can get a really broad audience. And every of them, we're over capacity, like we're having to turn people away. We're getting capacity 500 or more. But while people are there, we're setting them up on the SMS so they're able to then do voter contact while they're at the drive-in movies. With that, while we've been, so they're in communities, they're in a car with their family, they're social distancing. We're then running videos in between the movies about like activism, and folks are turning out. How could you not be excited and inspired that in the midst of this moment, people not only want to be in community still, but they want to engage on, making their community better.
What can we do? What can we, the people who are listening to this, because this will broadcast also on the Broadway Podcast Network besides today. We've only got how many days left till election?
So there's a couple of things, right? So there's Color of Change and there's the Color of Change PAC, which is our political arm. And those two things are separate, but both of them are places where I would urge people to go. The thing that I always say people need to do is, one, at Color of Change, we always need doers, donors, and door openers. I always call it the 3Ds. Those are the three things that I constantly need when I go out in the world, because those three things help us. The second thing I would say is that you all are individual nodes in your communities and your spaces. And we are under assault in terms of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And there's two different things. There's a misinformation that will say, like, you can vote up until December, or don't show up to the polls if you owe back taxes, or things that we've always faced down. Then there's the disinformation that's both domestic and foreign, that is at a scale that we've never seen before. And the reason why I talk about some of it as disinformation is because some of it is like, has levels of truth in it that we have to, and it's right now being deeply targeted at Black men. And we're running a whole series. We have a 7-figure ad buy in key states right now that's really focused on Black men, trying to deal with the fact that, the 94 crime bill was bad for our community. And I can't go out and say, no, it wasn't really that bad, or no, like Biden didn't have anything to do with it. But saying that Trump is better is actually not the way to go. Or just saying you should stay home, more importantly, if we want to really stay in the sort of like nonpartisan space. People are being fed disinformation that their vote is more powerful than just stay home. And I want to just say, like, that is very important. And we're fighting that disinformation. We have thousands of our members that are on social media, on these platforms, pushing back, going into the comment spaces. Like, we've trained people. We built this video platform where people go straight to video, and then we buy ads with their videos across the zip code tracks that they live in. So if you live in Kalamazoo, or if you live in Detroit, or if you live in Tallahassee, you'll see on your Google or Facebook the videos from people that actually sound like, come from, are part of those communities. And we've been building that, and we really tested it out around the census and are now rolling it out in a much bigger way now. And so all of that is like super, super exciting. The final thing I would just say, because it's all of that stuff that's around this. And then, even if we get the results that are more progressive and move us in the right direction, that doesn't mean that systemic injustice goes away. And in fact, we can make things in some ways more challenging if we don't do the work of accountability. Because elections alone don't create results. Elections alone give us the people that we have to go up against and that we have to push. And this is about picking the people that we feel we can push. And so the thing I would also say to folks is that as we talk about this moment, like, there's a couple of things I always ask people to do, is that we should make sure that we say what we mean. And when we talk about systemic injustice, lots of times we spend our time trying to fix the people that have been hurt and harmed, rather than fixing the systems that have hurt and harmed them. And so we will say things like, women are less likely to get hired in corporate America instead of corporate America excludes women. We will say Black people are less likely to get loans from the bank instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. Now, that may sound like just some language that I'm just throwing around, but the thing that's really important here is that when you say Black people are less likely to get loans from the bank instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people, you spend your time with financial literacy programs for Black people instead of actually ensuring that the banks are held accountable for excluding, redlining, targeting, exploiting. If you start with women being less likely to get into corporate America, people ask what's wrong with women, and they spend all their time in pipeline programs and mentorship programs instead of actually dealing with misogyny and racism that keeps women and women of color out of the positions that they actually belong in. Because we talk about communities that have been exploited, targeted, and left out as vulnerable. And vulnerability is a personal trait. Like, I am personally vulnerable when I go on social media and I see like an ex-boyfriend that's way too happy with his life. And I'm like, that's vulnerability. That's like me, my therapist, we need to work through that. That's like, I need to work on myself. If we talk about communities as vulnerable, then we like spend our time trying to fix them and their families. That to all of us is like, there's also the work every single day as people in our communities of how we talk about the issues. Yes, we want to care, but in order to turn caring into action, we have to talk about the issues in ways where we put the active voice on the system and the passive voice on the people that have been hurt, so that we focus on fixing systems and not spending our time fixing people. And so that's also what I just need more people doing, is like talking about the problem so we lead ourselves to the right solution. And when we lead ourselves to the right solution, if you have so many more people that have woken up and care about these issues, I can actually move them not to more mentorship programs, even though mentorship programs are really good and important, but also to recognize, why do we need mentorship programs in the first place? And what can we do to remove the barriers that have created the injustices that we are solving for through charity, that we should really be solving for through justice?
Get some water, because you've been talking.
Yes.
So you brought up the Black men. You know, my brother is a Trump voter, and he's in jail, but he's a Trump voter. And we saw 50 Cent, Trump voter. What is the appeal of Trump? Is it some swag? Is it some gangster thing? What is the Trump appeal? You're a Black man. What is his appeal to the Black man?
So it is definitely swag. He is, look, Black folks know that like the Democratic Party hasn't always been great. And Trump is like a lot of people's boss, right? And he may actually be like the boss that is racist, but has probably promoted you maybe. And he sounds like the white man that a lot of Black people know. And they can trust that that this might be the white man that I actually know. He also, and this is part of how enabling works. You know, when I first got to Color of Change, about 9 years ago, I started this campaign against this TV show where the star was going around saying a lot of racist things. And we launched this campaign, and a lot of both progressives and even some of the funders, and this Color Change was much smaller. I was taking over an organization that was like 5 staff. We have like 150 staff now. So it's like completely different organization from when I took it over 9 years ago. And so it was like a lot of people like, why are you focusing on this guy? He's like a not a worth your time. He's a joke, and you're like spending valuable resources. And we were trying to get this show. We were trying to get sponsors of the show to back away. And that show was The Celebrity Apprentice. The star was Donald Trump. And the issue was the fact that he was traveling around the country advancing a racist conspiracy theory about the president, while every week having a platform. And I mean, I still have the emails. I'm writing a book for Random House. Some of those things will be interspersed. And one of the things about it was like the lack of recognition of cultural power. And that's why I'll always come when culture makers, people who are in the cultural space invite me, because culture is so powerful and such a powerful indicator, right? That these corporations would enable this platform for him, that he could be on prime time, both be representing himself as a capable business person. Imagine if a Black person or a woman of any color had that many business failings, right? And could have a TV show where they were then positioned as a successful business person. Once people would have done all sorts of exposés that would have taken that person down. And they would have not lasted season over season, but he got to have that show season over season because of how racism works, how capitalism works, how misogyny works, how all of these systems sort of intertwine. And he had it for years, and America saw it. And he got to position himself that way. He got to build a brand that way that he delivers, right? And so, and then you have the Democrats, which can sometimes feel like the team that plays the Harlem Globetrotters, not the Harlem Globetrotters. And so do you want to be on the team that doesn't feel like a winning team? And I'm just saying this, I'm not explaining this, I'm not defending people voting for Donald Trump. I'm simply just saying how we end up getting there, that you end up with someone that feels like a winner, even if they aren't a winner. And then people get on board. And that's also why when I try to talk about voting out in the community, I don't start from a place where like, will Black people vote or won't they vote? Or even when I talk to Black men who might be peeling off, I do remind everyone that Black men are still, out of all of the sort of groups, the racial groups of men, the most likely to vote against Donald Trump. Even with the peel off, they're way more likely to vote against Donald Trump than any other group of men. Okay. They're just not as good as Black women on this issue. That's all, right? But no group of people is. So like, if we start from a place of talking about what folks are doing well, I feel like, I even talk about it from a voting perspective. Sometimes folks are like, what will the Black, numbers look like on voting? I'm like, well, first, let's start from the perspective, not of the deficit of Black voting, but let's start from the fact that Black people are actually the protagonists in the American story of voting. A protagonist is someone that has to overcome a lot of barriers, a lot of obstacles, has to fight violence sometimes, and all sorts of threats in order to win. And that's what Black people have done in every phase of their of our fight to vote, our fight to participate. Let's talk about Black folks as the protagonists in the story. And I believe that can open us up to actually get more people engaged rather than starting from a place. Do you want to be on the team that's a protagonist, or are you showing up to stop something bad from happening? I want to get people focused on, and that's why in this moment of like so much pain from COVID to the uprisings, and you ask me like, how do you show up? I'm like, I always want to show up with joy. And Black joy is not the absence of pain, but it's the presence of aspiration, not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. And so, sometimes that's hard certain mornings, but I also just constantly remind myself that there is an opportunity to win. And we can't win if we are sort of spending all of our time focusing on not losing.
Yes. I mean, the inspiration for me for writing the movie was, I was clear that he was going to win the first time, because I was like, Hillary couldn't beat a black man with the middle name Hussein. There is no way she's going to beat a white man. And so it was just delusional for me to even, I wasn't going to. So I thought, how can I influence people and focus them with what I do, which is I'm an artist. I can tell a story. I can tell a story that's, horror is the #1 genre in the world. It is the genre that you can put your politics into, because you can make it that, oh, that's a pretend world that we're talking about, but you can say real things inside of a world that feels like it's not quite like living next door. And so for me, Red Pill is about the difference between the Democrats, who are very smart, who are very educated, who are very politically correct and not very effective, and the other team who is like, we may not agree on a lot of things, but what we can agree on is we're going to take them out. And that is what Red Pill is. It is the two ideologies and the two different ways those ideologies work. And you can probably guess what the ending of Red Pill is just based on what I told you. But I was like, how can I do this with something that goes right to people viscerally? Because all of my talking about it, people just, treated me like I had two heads, like I was stupid or something to try to talk about it. So I said, I'll make a piece of, I'll tell a story about it.
Well, this is actually, I love that story because, on the left, we do a lot of things of saying, I'm cool, instead of just being cool. And, you're like, instead of like, you move from just talking about it to like, I'm going to put some content out. I like oftentimes when I talk to, Democrat elected officers, and they're like, asking me questions about engaging with the Color of Change community and what they could do. And, as we've grown, everyone wants to like talk to our members on IG Live or something. And one thing I oftentimes say is like, don't talk to me about like low wage workers. Go to Walmart on Thanksgiving and have dinner with some people. Like, don't talk about it, do it. And the more we do things, then we actually have the, like, don't talk about standing up to polluters. Like, don't turn down their money and hold them accountable. Like there's we're the only national Black civil rights organization that doesn't take corporate financial support. And the reason why we don't is because I can't hold them accountable if I do. Like, I just can't. Like, it's not like there's not good people that work inside of corporations. There's not like there's not some corporations where like, folks are really trying to do the right thing. But I can make them do more of the right thing if when I get on the phone with them, they know that the bottom line for me is how much justice they're going to get, not how many how many zeros they can put on a check. And that is like really important for us. And so even when the pandemic launched, there were all these corporations announcing all this money they were giving us. And I was seeing these press releases and I was like, I don't understand. These people should have at least called me first before they put our name in a press release, because we have turned down millions of dollars, and we've turned it down so that we can do the work. But we've also turned it down so that we can be very clear to the people that we're not just playing the same exact game as our opponents. And that becomes the problem sometimes. And that's one of the other things is that sometimes folks can say they're all the same. So at least I'm going to pick the person that feels like they're just telling me what they think rather than the person that's like giving me a lot of talking points. And a lot of people, unfortunately, feels that Donald Trump says exactly what he thinks. And he does. He like says it all. I mean, like to the point of like saying the strategy on stage, like, oh, you just said that, you're going to lose the left. Like there is no filter to everything that he does. Yeah.
And it's kind of refreshing for people. And, for me, I funded my movie myself. Mm-hmm. And so I'm the bottom line. And there's some points of view in my movie that, when I'm getting my critiques about it, there's some people like whiteness is not centered. White ineffectiveness is centered. There's a lynching in my movie. And it's like, sometimes like, that's too long. And I'm like, too long? Y'all did this for over 100 years. You're still doing it. We can't get lynching legislation. How can it be too long on my movie? This was postcards for you.
Yes. Yeah, like literal postcards that people would put in the mail, not in an envelope, and send it. We're like, passing hands. Yeah, I mean, Brian Stevenson, who I've unfortunately had to follow once or twice on stage after he talked, which you never want to do, is so eloquent in talking about sort of the ways in which we have not remembered. And when sort of the pandemic is up and you have a chance to get to the EGI's memorial, it is an absolute experience. And walking through that space, and actually when you get to the very end, there's a space where they ask you to sign up to take action. And that's Color of Change. That's the space where they ask you to take action. It's signing up to take action with us as sort of the kind of last thing you get as you're leaving.
Fantastic. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the fact that Color of Change has been working with Hollywood to get more representation. And we saw this We See You What letter sort of speaking to white American theater. And, I wrote an essay about that. And you had this experience of, we got more bodies that had color melanation, but what came out of their mouths was different. And I also wanted Sierra, who's a Hawk girl, to talk about it in terms of her experience as a superhero. But tell us about what ended up happening from your work with Hollywood in terms of more representation.
So, I mean, this is complicated because it's at every industry, right? We have this theory at Color of Changes: don't mistake presence for power. Presence is visibility, awareness, but power is the ability to change the rules, right? If you don't change the rules, you can mistake presence for power and think you've done something that you haven't done. You know, you can think a black president means that you are post-racial. You can think that because America has a lot of black celebrities, that they love, that America loves black people as much as America loves black culture. And America can love, celebrate, monetize black culture and hate black people at the same time. And those two things don't actually have to be in conflict. In fact, they can be sort of deeply intertwined in terms of how the systems work and the systems operate. And so, you know, one of the places where we've really leaned in at Color of Change is crime procedural shows. And the thing about crime procedural shows is that, and I've been saying this since I was at GLAAD, like when we were like shifting content, I was like, who's doing the crime procedural work in the civil rights space? Someone needs to do it. I wrote notes to Color of Change at the time, like if you all started, I will like come and help you all. And they were like, you should just come and run Color of Change. And I was like, no, I don't want to come run Color of Change. And then sure enough, that's what ended up happening. And you know, the thing about our report, Normalizing Injustice, and you can go to Normalizing Injustice, or you can get it at our site, changehollywood.org. The thing about that report, which is like really powerful, is we spent a year with the Norman Lear School at USC looking at all those crime procedures, the CSIs and Law and Orders, but not just looking at the representation of race, but the representation of crime on those shows and how they like were interrelated. And we released it in January, and a couple of things that were really powerful. One, that most of these shows had all white writers' rooms or one black person in the writers' room. Law and Order SVU, the season we looked at, all white writers' rooms. And it was about sex crimes, and they had one woman in the writers' room. Or two women in the writers' room. Chicago PD had all white writers' rooms. Look, these are places where folks are getting jobs. And actually the cast on those shows were deeply diverse. And so, you know, but then you had an all white writers' room. Then we went back and we looked at sort of the representation in deep ways. Way more black judges than ever existed in the real world on those shows. And so we started tracking it. You know, I'm not trying to take jobs away from black folks, right? But way more black judges. And so this is the trick that ends up happening, right? So all white writers' room will send justice through the mouths of oftentimes a symbolic black character that has no backstory. What would it be like for a black woman in her 60s to be a judge? What must she have to go through? What must she like think about the criminal justice system? But she becomes this sort of weird symbolic archetype for like stateliness and justice, and so that the people who are watching can feel like justice is being served. Surely this black person is not being railroaded by this black judge. And you have all these black judges on these shows are way disproportionate. And it almost operates as a tool so we don't question the justice that's on screen, where, you know, these shows don't actually force us to challenge a system that is deeply broken in all of the cities, where the police are out always doing the thing. You never see police raping anyone. You never see police actually harming. You don't see the police unions. You don't see the fact that most cases never go to trial. In fact, 90% in lots of places never go to trial because people are forced into pleas because they don't have lawyers. But now you have all these lawyers operating. Defense attorneys are seen as nefarious, like they have all these resources. And even when they have white characters that have done the crime, oftentimes the white characters are deeply manipulative or cunning or smart. They're criminal masterminds. And the black characters are oftentimes just violent. They are just like evil, right? So even when the white characters have done something, they've done something where they have like figured out something that makes them like really like
admirable, something that you
admirable as maybe a criminal, right? And so we looked at all of that, and we released it in January, and we spent time really pushing. We got all the stories in Variety and Hollywood Reporter, and even Chicago Tribune did a great piece on the Chicago shows. Dick Wolf said, who's the creator of a lot of these shows, said his shows are apolitical. You create a shows about in cities that are about race and crime, and and we couldn't get into writers' rooms really. And then the uprisings happened. I will say there were a lot of allies in this, like the Writers Guild and others that actually really helped us showcase the report in ways that I think were really helpful.
Yeah, but we haven't seen a change yet. We'll have to see.
We haven't seen a change, but I will say one thing what has happened is that since about June, the organization has been in the writers' room for basically every crime procedural on air right now. Overnight. People have, and I have shown up to these Zoom calls. We had to increase the staff doing this work. I've been showing up to some of them, but I don't make all of them. I show up to some of them, and I'll get like in the Zoom chat, I'll get like little Zooms on the side from like Black writers who are saying, "Hey, I just got hired." And then I have to let them know, I'm like, "Hey, here's my number," because I don't know if anyone knows, whoever owns the Zoom, you can even see private chats. So if you do use Zoom, because we do a lot of work in Silicon Valley, so if you've ever doing private chats with someone on Zoom, the person who owns a Zoom can see all of the chats, even the private ones afterwards. Hope I'm not making people think back too long. Just think forward. Just think about how you do this forward. The person who owns a Zoom can see all the chats, even the private, and it says private next to it. And so they can see communication back and forth. So I just let, that brother, that sister know, I'm like, hey, they can, contact me off this, because whatever we say next, your bosses are going to see. I
wanted Sarah to talk about presence and power as being a superhero on 3 TV shows.
Yeah. I mean, but we have a real opportunity here in some of these shows. And some of these shows, hopefully it's not just the season, but some of them are entering storylines that they've sent us the scripts for that are new and interesting. And because they've hired police officers to be consultants on these shows, they should be engaging folks like us to provide a level of balance and insight and perspective from community to help shape a better reality. But we're going to have some shows that are going to look at police unions. They're going to look at police misconduct. And that will be on the air in a way that we've never seen before. And so, that is a result of both building the infrastructure and challenging it, but also leveraging moments that you can't always create, which is the moment of uprising this summer where we knew like this is a window. And hopefully more Black writers get jobs. Hopefully we can force folks to look at those numbers clearly, but it's, we'll see.
Well, and I've been pitching a show with Bridget Carpenter about pro se litigants, because like 80% of people in court are representing themselves. And I feel like if we start looking at that and the families and way they are, their lives as they're stuck in the court system instead of the judges and the lawyers who are against them, that's a whole area of entertainment that would be more realistic. I'm turning it over to Sierra.
Yeah. So this has, been an ongoing thing for me ever since 2015 when I joined those shows.
Everybody know what shows.
Sorry?
Let us know what shows.
Yeah, so I played Hawk Girl, Kendra Munoz Saunders. She's supposedly supposed to be Hispanic. I am not Hispanic, so that's also an interesting representation thing. And we also never spoke about that at all on the show, and it was not a part of her identity in any form or fashion, which is also interesting. So when I joined the show, Legends of Tomorrow, also Arrow and Flash, they're all they work together. There were, I think, 3 female writers, 2 of which, mostly one of which identified as a woman of color. And it's just, I think one of the best ways to illustrate it is we were time traveling a lot on the show. And there were 2 people of color in a cast of like 9. It was me and one of my co-stars, Franz Drame. And there was an episode where we went back to the 60s, 50s, I think, 1950 something. And when we got the first draft of the script, Franz and I were like, oh, snap, it's about to pop off for us, because this is the first time we're going back and having to like really be seen in an era where it's dangerous for us, like what's going to happen. And essentially there was no mention of what it would be like to be a person of color in America at that time. And Franz and I were like losing our minds, like, this can't be. So we reached out to the one woman of color and we were like, yo fam, what's happening here? You know, like I was in an interracial relationship and he was like hanging out with a bunch of white teenagers of the time, you know, like at the soda shop or whatever. It just like didn't make sense. And essentially she was like, yeah, like they're afraid to touch on the topic at all, because of course it's being run by white cis men, the whole shebang. And she was like, they don't want to talk about it at all. And we're like, well, this can't stand. So we're coming to you. And she was like, I don't have the power to say anything. And I'm a new hire and I'm afraid to lose my job, which she did then in some capacity, whether she stepped away or lost or was asked to go away, did lose that job. She's no longer in that position and was quickly removed. So I don't know what happened there. All I can say is we asked for help. She didn't even feel like she could have those conversations. We ended up getting mentions put in there, but it wasn't like the crux of the show by any means. It was kind of brushed off a little bit. You know, I got called a maid at one point and I was like, wow, I guess this is really novel for them, as if I, as a woman of color, wouldn't have known that would be an issue. Right. So like, if that to me feels like a pretty good illustration of the lack of understanding and also the lack of intentionality or like wanting to actually have these conversations or even talk to the Black writer in the room. Like, does this make sense? Like they weren't asking her that clearly. And she didn't even feel that she could do that. And she was probably right, you know? So there was just absolutely no support. Even in the creative side, but even just like as like the actor, I got horribly screwed over in every sense of the word. I was being harassed. I was being taken aside and yelled at. I was being hilariously underpaid. I was having amenities given to everyone else but me and the other person of color, lied to, caught in lies and no apology. Like, I mean, just from top to bottom, it was a disaster. And then essentially what occurred, so far as I can tell, but this is also like, I don't have the power to know this, but I know what went on. I tried several times with my agent and manager to have a conversation with the producers and Berlanti, which I got no response to, neither did they. And he never reached out. And I tried to have many conversations with the people about what was going on and saying like, you know, people might say this looks like racism. And that was the only time things started to change, when we finally called them out and said, you know, we would hate to have to bring this to, you know, the populace, the general populace, and say, look at what's happening here. Doesn't this seem crazy and racist? And then all of a sudden things started changing overnight. Like I got a new trailer that wasn't broken down. I got it, you know, like all of a sudden things started to make sense. But then I was consequently written off of the show and lied to first and then written off of the show, which I was already talking to my agents. I was like, please, I need to quit. How can I get out of this 6-year contract? I can't do this. So the truth of the matter is I wanted to go anyway because it was so awful. But yeah, like I don't pay attention to those shows anymore. So I don't know that things have changed, but I know that there's more women on the show. I don't know that the writers' rooms have changed. And I know that the executive producers have not changed. And so, you know, even like when everything started popping off, you know, a couple months ago, my Black co-star Franz Drama, he reached out to me and he was like, look, do you want to write something or call these people out? This is the time. Like, I want to back you. I also had some of my other white co-stars reach out and say, we'll back you. We're here for you. And like, even now, I'm saying this here, but I'm terrified to put it anywhere else. And I'm terrified to say anything because I essentially got blacklisted for a while. And I just kind of was like, cool, I don't want to act again anyway, because if that's what it is, then I don't want to do it, which sucks because it's like, this is the God-given talent and also the skill that I trained in and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to train in. So it's like, it's heartbreaking. And I know I'm not the only one. And I think like people reaching out to me saying like, we know your story, you know, like my Black friends reaching out and saying, we know your story, you should tell it, you should tell it. This is the moment. I hear it and I still am petrified, you know, and I still feel like I can't really say it. And I also wonder, like my big question, I think, is what good can I do? And I think like there is good in talking about it, right? So that people can see it for what it really is. And I know that that's powerful and important. But there are other people telling their stories, right? And so not everybody has to tell the story. I think we get it, hopefully, or we're starting to, right? And there are people who have more power and more leverage and more safety and those things that are telling the story. So I'm like, is me telling the story that helpful? And then it's like, what do I hope will change? You know, like I could have a personal vendetta against these EPs, these white male EPs who harassed me in every possible way and broke my spirit for years. Like I don't. What I do have though is a hope that they won't continue to do that, even though I know that the truth is they probably are, right? So like that is my one hope of like, if I call these people out and I'm very explicit and say, this is what happened to me, this is what was said to me, this is who said it, maybe there will be a shift. But it's also like, again, they have more power than me to take things away from me when it's already hard enough, you know? So it's like, I'm not even really sure what to do with all of that. But, you know, I'm glad that you guys are getting in the rooms finally to change it so that, you know, like I should not have been, I guess, playing a Hispanic person. Like, and also if we were going to play that, then it should have been a part of my identity. Like we don't know anything about her family life. We don't know how she feels in regular like time, and then she's time traveling and we barely touch on the fact that it's so uncomfortable for her because she ends up living in that time period for like 2 years because she gets trapped there, the character. And I only talk about the fact that I'm like, I'm not a librarian, and that was so hard for me because I had to be a librarian in the 1950s. And it's like, no, it would be.
That would have been amazing for you to be a librarian in the 1950s.
That's what I'm saying. I was like,
no, like the greatest spy. Yeah, there might have been a movie about you, you know, like, you know.
So like I'm saying, I'm like, wow, like we just don't, and I see this constantly with auditions, like they just don't take into account. Like it just feels like, oh, this is written for a standardized white female and they're looking for diversity, and I'm a palatable version of whatever diversity they're looking for, so go ahead and chuck me on in there, you know what I mean? Like I don't ever feel like I'm stepping into a role and being like, oh, they see me and what I go through, or this is representative of any part of my life whatsoever.
And that's why I say it's Get Out. It's all these white EPs, all these white writers. They get to have their voice and they get to cloak it in any skin, any body, any gender that they want. But the voice is still the white voice and predominantly the white male voice. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I've learned from making Red Pill is that I got to build a world. And when people come and tell me this part of the world doesn't work, or I don't get that, or I don't understand, I think, but it's my world. I'm the god of my world. White men have been the god of worlds for a century. What I want is for the industry, our entertainment industry, to suddenly just let us see these other worlds that other people create and stop saying whether they're right or wrong. Just go, oh my God, let's go into the world of this person from this culture and this age and this gender, and let us just see all of these worlds. And that will require the people who have the jobs and give the jobs to their friends to get out of the way so other people can come in and their voices can be heard.
Right.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, you know, America, I mean, for all of Hollywood's sort of the theory that Hollywood is so advanced and liberal, America elected a Black president before Hollywood gave us a big budget, a Black superhero.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Rashad. I know that you are so busy. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We are going to support you. People, go to Color of Change, sign up, donate. take action. Take action. We're going to be taking action no matter who wins this election. We're going to be taking action because it's needed. There's only one thing to change, and that is everything. And that is a quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore. So everybody wear a mask. They save lives. Thank you, Rashad, Sierra, Marissa.
Thank you guys
for spending this time with us today. And you
Appreciate
can listen to the
BPN
on the Broadway Podcast Network, bpn.fm YCST. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
Such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All that you do return to 1,000-fold. Blessings.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Blessings.